Billionaire went to the hospital to visit his hospitalized fiancée, found his ex holding a newborn. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Sebastian Caldwell sat in his black Bentley Continental, staring at the pristine glass facade of St. Mary's Medical Center. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, the Italian leather beneath his fingers worn smooth from 2 years of the same nervous habit. At 38, Sebastian commanded boardrooms filled with pharmaceutical executives twice his age. His steel gray eyes could close million-dollar deals with a single glance, and his tall, athletic frame, maintained through rigorous morning workouts, carried an authority that made competitors step aside. Today, however, none of that mattered. He was just a man afraid to walk through hospital doors. The December wind rattled against the car windows, carrying the scent of snow from the nearby suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut. Around him, the hospital parking lot buzzed with the quiet efficiency of afternoon shift changes. Doctors in white coats hurried between buildings, nurses clutched coffee cups against the cold, and families emerged from automatic doors with expressions that ranged from relief to devastation. Sebastian's phone buzzed against the mahogany dashboard. A text from his father. Miranda's surgery went well. She's asking for you. Don't disappoint the Whitlows. Miranda Whitlow, his fiancée of 6 months. Beautiful, socially appropriate, and currently recovering from a rhinoplasty procedure that her mother had insisted would perfect her profile for the wedding photos. The engagement had been arranged with the same clinical precision his family used for pharmaceutical mergers. Beneficial for both parties, minimal emotional risk. He scrolled through his contacts and found Miranda's name, but his thumb hovered over the call button. The relationship felt like wearing a suit that almost fit. Comfortable enough, but never quite right. Just get this over with, he muttered, adjusting his navy Tom Ford suit jacket and stepping out into the cold. The hospital's main entrance opened with a soft whoosh, releasing a mixture of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Sebastian had donated $3 million to this facility's cardiac wing, yet he'd never actually set foot inside. His assistant usually handled hospital visits, charity events, board meetings, the occasional ribbon cutting. This was different. This was personal, and this was where Rowan Pierce worked. Sebastian stopped mid-stride as a nurse with auburn hair walked past, her laugh echoing off the marble floors. For a split second his heart hammered against his ribs, but it wasn't her. It was never her anymore. Dr. Rowan Pierce, 31 years old with honey blonde hair that caught light like spun gold and green eyes that seemed to see straight through every wall he'd ever built. She'd been gone from his life for 8 months now, but her absence still felt like a missing limb. The elevator dinged softly as Sebastian pressed the button for the 4th floor. Miranda's private room was in the VIP wing, where privacy came with marble bathrooms and views of Long Island Sound. The kind of place where scandals went to heal quietly. Mr. Caldwell? A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Dr. Margaret Foster, the chief of staff, approaching with a practiced smile. She was in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat chignon, and the kind of competent air that made him think of his prep school headmistress. Dr. Foster, thank you for taking such good care of Miranda. Of course. The Whitlow family has been wonderful to work with. Her pause lasted a beat too long. I should mention, we had a staffing change recently. Dr. Pierce returned from her leave of absence this week. The words hit him like cold water. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but Dr. Foster had known him long enough to catch the slight tension in his jaw. I thought you should know given the circumstances. Thank you for the heads up. She's working in the maternity ward now. Different floor entirely. Dr. Foster's tone was carefully neutral. Your fiancée is just down this hall. As she walked away, Sebastian found himself staring at the elevator buttons. 4th floor, VIP suites. 2nd floor, maternity ward. The numbers seemed to mock him. He'd come here to see Miranda, to play the role of the devoted fiancé, to maintain the perfect image his family had spent decades crafting. Instead, he was thinking about Rowan's hands, how they'd felt against his chest during those quiet Sunday mornings when the rest of the world seemed to disappear. The elevator opened on the 4th floor, and Sebastian stepped out into a hallway lined with oil paintings of pastoral scenes. Everything here whispered expensive discretion. He walked slowly toward room 412, his footsteps muffled by thick carpet. Through the partially open door he could see Miranda propped up against silk pillows, a small bandage across her nose. She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking social media to see if any paparazzi had spotted him arriving. Her mother, Catherine Whitlow, sat nearby with her perpetual expression of mild disapproval. Sebastian paused in the doorway, struck by how little he felt. No rush of affection, no concern for her pain, no desire to comfort, just emptiness. "Sebastian," Miranda's voice was slightly nasal from the surgery. "I was wondering when you'd get here." Traffic was heavy. He stepped inside and kissed her forehead dutifully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but Dr. Sanderson says the results will be perfect." She grabbed his hand with both of hers. "Mom brought magazines. Want to look at venue options for the reception?" Catherine Whitlow smiled approvingly. "The Pierre has an opening in June, but we'd need to commit by—" A commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Raised voices, the sound of wheels rolling quickly across linoleum, and then a woman's voice calling out medical terminology Sebastian didn't recognize. "Emergency and maternity," Miranda said, wrinkling her nose. "I'm so glad I chose this floor instead." But Sebastian wasn't listening anymore, because in that chaos of voices, he'd heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice he knew better than his own. Rowan's voice. She was here, not just in the building, but close enough that he could hear her coordinating what sounded like a medical emergency. Her voice carried the same calm authority it always had, the tone that had once talked him through panic attacks and late-night doubts about taking over his father's company. "Darling?" Miranda's hand squeezed his. "You look pale. Are you all right?" Sebastian realized he'd been holding his breath. "I'm fine. Just, hospitals make me uncomfortable." It was a lie. Hospitals had never bothered him before. It was the possibility of seeing Rowan that made him feel like his chest was caving in. "Well, sit down then." Catherine gestured to the leather chair beside Miranda's bed. "We have so much to discuss about the wedding. The florist needs final approval on the centerpieces and—" Another sound from the hallway, footsteps moving quickly, and then a brief moment of silence. Sebastian found himself edging toward the door. "I'm going to get some coffee," he said abruptly. "The nurse can bring you—" Miranda started. "I need some air." He stepped into the hallway before either woman could protest, his heart pounding against his ribs. The corridor was empty now, but he could smell a faint trace of the jasmine perfume Rowan had always worn. Or maybe he was imagining it. Sebastian stood there for a long moment, torn between the safe, predictable world waiting for him in room 412 and the dangerous possibility of walking toward the elevators, toward the second floor, toward answers to questions he'd been too afraid to ask. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his father. "Remember what we discussed. The Pierce girl was a distraction. Miranda is your future." Sebastian stared at the message, feeling that familiar surge of anger mixed with doubt. For 8 months he'd tried to believe his father's version of events, that Rowan had been using him, that the connection they'd shared was one-sided, that her pregnancy announcement had been manipulation. But standing here, with her voice still echoing in his memory, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he'd been told was a lie. The elevator dinged softly at the end of the hall. Sebastian looked back at room 412, where Miranda was probably already planning their matching outfits for next week's charity gala. Then he looked at the elevator, where the numbers above the doors showed a car stopping at the second floor, the maternity ward, where Rowan was. His feet started moving before his mind could catch up. What would you do if the love you walked away from was just an elevator ride away? Sebastian's finger hovered over the elevator button marked 2, as if it might burn him. The small space felt suffocating, filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the faint scent of disinfectant that seemed to permeate every corner of the hospital. When the doors opened on the second floor, he was hit immediately by a different energy. This wasn't the hushed luxury of the VIP wing. Here, life happened in bursts. Crying babies, relieved laughter, hurried conversations in multiple languages. The maternity ward buzzed with the raw, unfiltered emotion of new beginnings. Sebastian stepped out cautiously, his Italian leather shoes silent against the polished linoleum. The walls were painted in soft yellows and greens, with framed photographs of sleeping newborns creating a gallery of peaceful faces. Everything here spoke of hope, of futures just beginning. He felt like an intruder, a young nurse with kind eyes and paint-stained scrubs, evidence of the children's art therapy session that had just ended, looked up from her station. Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for... Sebastian paused, realizing he had no legitimate reason to be here. I'm Sebastian Caldwell. I was hoping to speak with Dr. Pierce. The nurse's expression shifted slightly, a mix of recognition and something that looked almost like sympathy. Oh, Mr. Caldwell. She glanced toward a room at the end of the hall, then back at him. Dr. Pierce is... She's not seeing patients today. Is she ill? No, sir. The nurse seemed to struggle with how much to reveal. She had her baby this morning. The words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the nurse's station to steady himself, his knuckles going white against the pale wood surface. Her baby? A beautiful little boy, born at 6:47 a.m. The nurse's voice was gentle, but her eyes were studying Sebastian's reaction carefully. Are you... family? Sebastian couldn't speak. His throat felt like it was closing. 8 months ago, Rowan had told him she was pregnant. 8 months ago, he'd accused her of lying, of trying to trap him, of carrying another man's child. 8 months ago, he'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. Sir? The nurse reached across the counter. Are you all right? You look pale. I need... Sebastian struggled to form words. I need to see her. I'm sorry, but visiting hours for new mothers are restricted to immediate family. Hospital policy. Sebastian pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called the number he knew by heart. Dr. Foster answered on the second ring. Margaret, this is Sebastian Caldwell. I need you to clear me for a visit to the maternity ward. Room. He looked at the nurse, who reluctantly mouthed, 218. Room 218. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sebastian, I'm not sure that's wise. Please. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she sighed softly. Give me 5 minutes. While he waited, Sebastian found himself pacing the small area near the elevators. Other visitors came and went, proud grandparents carrying balloon bouquets, fathers who looked shell-shocked with exhaustion and joy, friends clutching gift bags and flowers. Everyone here was celebrating. Everyone except him. His phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Where did you go? Mom is getting worried. Sebastian stared at the message for a long moment, then turned his phone face down without responding. Mr. Caldwell? The same nurse approached him with a gentle smile. Dr. Foster called. You're cleared for a brief visit. But please remember, Dr. Pierce has been through a long labor. She needs rest. Sebastian nodded, not trusting his voice. Room 218 is just down this hall. The door will be partially closed, but you can knock softly. Each step toward room 218 felt like walking through quicksand. Sebastian's mind raced through every conversation he'd had with his father 8 months ago, every doubt that had been planted, every cruel word he'd thrown at Rowan during their final fight. You think I'm that naive? You think I don't know what this is? Sebastian, please listen to me. I've seen the photos, Rowan. I know about you and Dr. Matthews. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? What photos? Sebastian, what are you talking about? Don't lie to me anymore. If this baby is even real, it's not mine. The memory of Rowan's face in that moment, the way all the color drained from her cheeks, the way her hand instinctively moved to protect her still flat stomach, nearly brought Sebastian to his knees right there in the hospital corridor. He stopped outside room 218, his hand raised to knock, and heard a sound that made his chest tighten. Soft humming. Rowan had always hummed when she was content. During their lazy Sunday mornings, when she'd make coffee while he read the financial news, when she'd tend to the small herb garden on her apartment balcony, when she'd curl up against him after they'd made love, her fingers tracing absent patterns on his chest. Sebastian knocked softly, barely audible. Come in, came Rowan's voice, tired but warm. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was smaller than Miranda's suite, but it felt infinitely warmer. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows overlooking a small garden where snow dusted the bare branches of oak trees. Get well cards lined the windowsill, and a small bouquet of daisies, Rowan's favorite flowers, sat on the bedside table. And there, in the hospital bed, was Rowan. She looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore no makeup, but her skin had that luminous quality he'd heard people talk about with new mothers. She was wearing a simple hospital gown, and in her arms, Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. In her arms was a tiny baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. The infant was sleeping peacefully, his small fist curled near his face, his features delicate and perfect. Rowan looked up and saw Sebastian standing in the doorway. Her expression didn't change dramatically. She didn't gasp or cry out or demand that he leave. She simply looked at him with those green eyes that had once seen right through to his soul, and said quietly, "Hello, Sebastian." "Rowan." His voice was barely a whisper. I heard you had a baby." "Yes." She adjusted the infant slightly in her arms, her movements gentle and sure. "This is James. James Oliver Pierce." Sebastian took a step closer, then stopped. "Pierce? My last name, yes." There was no accusation in her voice, but the implication was clear. This child would carry her name because his father had abandoned them both. "Rowan, Sebastian struggled to find words that could possibly bridge the chasm between them. 8 months ago you made it very clear what you thought of me and this pregnancy." Rowan's voice remained calm, but Sebastian could see the tension in her shoulders. "You made your choice, Sebastian. I respected it, but I was wrong." "Were you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sebastian moved closer to the bed, and as he did, he got his first clear look at the baby's face. James had Sebastian's nose, Sebastian's chin, and when the infant briefly opened his eyes just for a moment before drifting back to sleep, Sebastian saw his own steel-gray eyes looking back at him. The room tilted. Sebastian reached for the nearest chair and sat down heavily, his hands shaking. "Oh my God," he whispered. "He's yours," Rowan finished quietly. "Yes, Sebastian, he's yours." The words echoed in the small room like a confession, like an accusation, like a prayer all at once. Sebastian buried his face in his hands. 8 months of suppressed grief and regret crashing over him like a tidal wave. All those nights he'd lain awake wondering if he'd made the right choice. All those moments when he'd reached for his phone to call her, only to stop himself because his father's voice was always there, reminding him that successful men didn't let emotions cloud their judgment. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Rowan, I'm so sorry." "Sebastian?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." He raised his head and she was studying him with the same clinical intensity she'd once used to diagnose patients. But underneath the professional assessment, he could see something else, a carefully guarded hope that she was trying very hard to suppress. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I came to visit my fiancée. She had surgery." The words felt like ash in his mouth. "I heard your voice in the hallway and your fiancée." Rowan's expression didn't change, but Sebastian saw her arms tighten slightly around the baby. "Of course. Miranda Whitlow, isn't it? I saw the engagement announcement in the Times." "Rowan, congratulations." The word was like a slap. Sebastian stood up abruptly, running his hands through his dark hair. It's not what you think." "What I think," Rowan said carefully, "is that you're engaged to be married to someone else, and I just gave birth to your son. What I think is that this conversation is about 8 months too late." Sebastian turned to face her fully, and in that moment, looking at Rowan holding their child, he felt something break open inside his chest. All the walls his father had helped him build, all the rationalizations and justifications and careful emotional distance, it all crumbled. "I never stopped loving you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Rowan's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "Don't. It's true. Don't do this, Sebastian. Don't come here and say things like that when you're engaged to someone else. When you accused me of, I know what I accused you of, and I was wrong. About everything." Baby James stirred in Rowan's arms, making a small sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. She immediately began rocking him gently, her attention focused entirely on the infant. "He's beautiful," Sebastian whispered. "He is. Can I?" Sebastian's voice broke slightly. "Can I hold him?" Rowan looked up at him for a long moment, and Sebastian could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to say yes, the part that had once loved him enough to plan a future together. But the other part, the part that had been hurt and abandoned and forced to face pregnancy and childbirth alone, wasn't ready to trust him. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said finally. The rejection hit Sebastian harder than he'd expected. He nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral, but Rowan knew him too well. "Sebastian, you have to understand." "No, I get it. I haven't earned that right. This isn't about earning rights. This is about protecting my son. Our son." The words hung between them like a challenge. Rowan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My son," she repeated firmly. "You made it very clear 8 months ago that you wanted nothing to do with this child. You can't just walk back into our lives and, what if I could prove that I was manipulated? What if I could show you that everything I believed about you and Dr. Matthews was a lie?" Rowan's expression shifted. confusion flickering across her features. What are you talking about? Before Sebastian could answer, his phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet room, and baby James startled slightly. Sebastian glanced at the screen and saw his father's name, Richard Caldwell, the man who had orchestrated Sebastian's entire life, including the destruction of the best relationship he'd ever had. Sebastian stared at the phone, then looked at Rowan and his son. For the first time in 8 months, he had a choice to make, and this time he was going to make the right one. Sebastian stared at his father's name flashing on the phone screen, the sound seeming to echo off the walls of the small hospital room. Baby James stirred again at the noise, and Rowan instinctively pulled him closer to her chest, her protective instincts kicking in. "Answer it," she said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. "Don't keep your father waiting on my account." Sebastian looked at her, then at his son, their son, and made a decision that would have been unthinkable 8 months ago. He declined the call. The sudden silence felt profound. Rowan's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her carefully maintained composure. "You just hung up on him?" "Yes." Sebastian set the phone face down on the small table beside her bed. "What I have to say to you is more important than anything he could possibly want." "Sebastian, you don't understand what you're doing. Your family, my family destroyed us." The words came out raw, painful, and I let them. Rowan shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed, James still sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What are you talking about? You saw those photos of me and Dr. Matthews. You said—" "What photos, Rowan?" The question hung in the air. Rowan blinked, confusion clouding her features. "The photos your father showed you, of me having dinner with David. You said you'd seen proof that I was—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face paling. "Sebastian, what photos?" Before Sebastian could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Without looking, he knew it was his father, probably sending increasingly urgent demands for him to call back immediately. "There were no photos," Sebastian said quietly, the full scope of his father's manipulation finally becoming clear. "Were there?" Rowan stared at him for a long moment, her medical training helping her process information quickly, even through exhaustion and emotional shock. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you accused me of cheating, questioned the paternity of our child, and ended our engagement based on photos that didn't exist." Sebastian felt like he was going to be sick. "Rowan, photos of me with David Matthews, my colleague, my friend." Her voice was rising slightly, but she caught herself, glancing down at the baby to make sure she hadn't disturbed him. "Sebastian, David is gay. He's been with his partner Marcus for 6 years. The room spun around Sebastian. He gripped the back of the chair he'd been sitting in, his knuckles white with tension. "That dinner," Rowan continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "was to celebrate David's engagement to Marcus. I was the only person from the hospital they'd told. David asked me to have dinner with them because he wanted to thank me for covering his shifts when Marcus was in the ICU after his car accident." Sebastian remembered that night now. He'd been supposed to meet Rowan for their own dinner plans, but she'd called to cancel last minute, saying something urgent had come up with a colleague. His father had found him later that evening, sitting alone in their usual restaurant, and had made some comment about women and their priorities. "My father knew," Sebastian said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "He knew you were out with David and Marcus, and he used it against us. But there were no photos." "No, there were no photos. There were just suggestions, comments about your pattern of behavior, and questions about whether I really knew you as well as I thought I did." Sebastian ran his hands through his hair, angry at himself for being so easily manipulated. "He planted seeds of doubt, and I let them grow into something monstrous." Rowan was quiet for a long time, processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "So when I told you I was pregnant, and you accused me of trying to trap you with another man's child, I had already been convinced that you were capable of deception." Sebastian's voice cracked. "God, Rowan, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." "Language," Rowan said automatically, glancing down at James, and despite everything, Sebastian almost smiled. Even in the middle of the most painful conversation of their lives, she was thinking about their son's well-being. Their son, the reality of it, was still sinking in. Sebastian had a son, a child who had been growing and developing and being born while Sebastian was taking antidepressants and going through the motions of an engagement he didn't want. "What's he like?" Sebastian asked quietly. Rowan looked down at James, and her entire expression softened. "He's perfect. He sleeps well usually, except when there are thunderstorms. He makes this little humming sound when he's content, just like—" She stopped herself. "Like me. Like you used to." She adjusted the baby's blanket. "He has your stubborn streak, too. The nurses say he's the most determined baby they've ever seen when it comes to feeding time." Sebastian moved closer to the bed slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Rowan, can I just look at him? I won't ask to hold him. I just want to see him properly." She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Sebastian knelt beside the bed, bringing his face level with the sleeping infant. James was beautiful in the way that all newborns were beautiful, but Sebastian could see specific features that made his chest tighten with recognition. The baby had Sebastian's dark hair, though it was soft and fine. His ears were small and perfectly formed, just like Rowan's. His hands were tiny but long-fingered, like Sebastian's had been in his childhood photos. "He looks like both of us," Sebastian whispered. "The nurses have been commenting on it all day." Rowan's voice was soft. "They keep asking when Daddy is coming to visit." The words hit Sebastian like a punch to the gut. "What do you tell them? That Daddy isn't in the picture?" Sebastian closed his eyes, the pain of those words nearly overwhelming him. When he opened them again, Rowan was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Sebastian, why are you really here? I told you. I came to visit Miranda." "No." Rowan's voice was firm. "Why are you here? In this room, asking about photos that don't exist, looking at our son like your world just shattered. You're engaged to someone else. You made your choice 8 months ago." Sebastian stood up slowly, pacing to the window that overlooked the hospital's small garden. Snow was still falling, covering the bare branches and creating a pristine white landscape that looked deceptively peaceful. "Because I've been miserable every single day since I walked away from you," he said finally. "Because I've been on medication for depression and anxiety since our breakup. Because I agreed to marry Miranda not because I love her, but because I convinced myself that what I felt for you was dangerous, unstable, wrong." He turned back to face her. "Because every morning for 8 months, I've woken up reaching for you, and every night I've gone to sleep wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life." Rowan's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "That's not fair. I know. You can't just show up here and tell me these things. You're getting married, Sebastian, to someone else. I don't love her. That's not my problem anymore. Isn't it?" Sebastian moved back toward the bed, his voice urgent. "Rowan, look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like a man who's happy with his choices?" She did look at him then, her medical training taking over as she assessed him clinically. Sebastian knew what she would see. The weight loss, the tension lines around his eyes, the way he held himself like someone bracing for the next blow. "You look terrible," she said honestly. "I feel terrible. Every day." He knelt beside the bed again. "Rowan, what if we could start over? What if I could prove to you that I'm not the same man who walked away 8 months ago? Sebastian, what if I broke the engagement? What if I told my father exactly what I think of his manipulation? What if I chose you? Chose us?" The questions hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Rowan looked down at James, then back at Sebastian. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What if you change your mind again? What if your father finds some other way to convince you that I'm not good enough for the Caldwell family name? What if you wake up one day and decide that we're too complicated, too messy, too real? I won't. You did before." The simple truth of that statement silenced Sebastian completely. His phone buzzed again, and this time Rowan glanced at it. "That's probably Miranda," she said, wondering where her fiancé went. Sebastian looked at the phone, then at Rowan, then at his sleeping son. "Let me ask you something," he said quietly. "If I could prove that everything that happened 8 months ago was based on lies, if I could show you that my father orchestrated our breakup because he was afraid of losing control over me, would it matter? Would it change anything?" Rowan was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired. "Sebastian, even if that's all true, it doesn't change the fact that you believed it. It doesn't change the fact that when I needed you most, when I was scared and pregnant and trying to figure out how to tell the man I loved that we were going to be parents, you looked me in the eye and told me that our child wasn't yours." The words were like a physical blow. Sebastian remembered that moment with crystal clarity now. The hurt in Rowan's eyes, the way she'd stepped back from him as if he'd struck her, the careful way she'd composed herself before saying, "Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss." "I was protecting myself," he said weakly. "From what? From me? From love?" Rowan shook her head. Sebastian, I would have fought your father. I would have fought your whole family if necessary. But I couldn't fight you too. Baby James stirred in her arms, making small sounds that indicated he might be waking up. Rowan immediately began the gentle rocking motion that all new mothers seem to know instinctively. He's going to be hungry soon, she said, and Sebastian understood that it was both an observation and a dismissal. Rowan, please, just tell me there's a chance. Tell me that if I can fix this, if I can prove that we were destroyed by lies and manipulation, that you'd be willing to try again. She looked at him for a long moment, and Sebastian saw years of history in her expression. All their good times and bad, all their hopes and disappointments, all the love they'd shared and the pain they'd caused each other. I can't tell you that, she said finally. Not yet, maybe not ever. Sebastian's phone rang again, and this time when he looked at the screen, it wasn't his father, it was Miranda. And suddenly Sebastian realized that he was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of his life. He could answer that call, go back to his fiancée's room, and continue playing the role of the dutiful son and perfect husband-to-be. Or he could make a choice that would probably destroy his relationship with his family, his carefully planned future, and everything his father had worked to build for him. He looked at Rowan, holding their son, and for the first time in 8 months the choice was easy. Sebastian stared at Miranda's name on his phone screen, her contact photo smiling back at him, a perfectly posed shot from their engagement party at the country club. Behind that frozen smile, he could see everything his life was supposed to be: predictable, appropriate, financially advantageous, safe. The phone continued ringing, each tone seeming to grow louder in the small hospital room. Baby James opened his eyes at the sound, those familiar gray eyes that were unmistakably Sebastian's own. For a moment, father and son looked at each other across the small space that felt like an entire universe. Sebastian turned off the phone. You can't keep ignoring reality forever, Rowan said softly, but there was something in her voice. Not encouragement exactly, but not condemnation either. Watch me. Sebastian set the phone aside and moved closer to the bed. Rowan, I know I have no right to ask this, but will you let me hold him? Just once. She studied his face for a long moment, and Sebastian could see her internal struggle. The woman who had loved him enough to plan a life together was warring with the mother who would do anything to protect her child from disappointment and abandonment. If I let you hold him, she said finally, what happens next? Do you go back upstairs to your fiancé and pretend this never happened? Do you add us to your list of charitable causes you feel guilty about? No. Then what, Sebastian? Because I need to know what you're thinking before I let you get any more involved in his life. Sebastian pulled the chair closer to her bed and sat down, leaning forward so they were at eye level. I'm thinking that 8 months ago I was a coward who let my father manipulate me into throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm thinking that I've spent every day since then living half a life, going through the motions of being the man my family wants me to be while feeling dead inside. He paused, watching James's small fingers curl and uncurl against the blue blanket. I'm thinking that my son, our son, was born this morning, and instead of being here with you, holding your hand and cutting his umbilical cord and crying because I was so overwhelmed with love and gratitude, I was sitting in a conference room listening to my father discuss merger strategies. Rowan's expression softened slightly. Sebastian, I'm thinking, he continued, his voice growing stronger, that I want to be the kind of father who shows up, who doesn't miss birthdays or school plays or scraped knees because he's too busy maintaining appearances. I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. And Miranda? The question hung between them like a challenge. Sebastian took a deep breath. I'm going to end the engagement. Just like that? Just like that. Rowan shifted James slightly in her arms, studying Sebastian's face. Your family will disown you. Probably. The Whitlows will be humiliated. There will be scandal. I know. You'll lose the pharmaceutical merger your father's been working on for 3 years. Sebastian met her eyes. I don't care. Yes, you do. Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. Sebastian, you care about your company, about the employees who depend on you, about the research that saves lives. You can't just throw all of that away. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing to build something different, something real. He gestured between them. This is real, Rowan. What we had was real. This baby is real. Before Rowan could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. A nurse peeked in, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Pierce, but there's a gentleman at the nurse's station asking about you. He says he's Mr. Caldwell's assistant? Sebastian closed his eyes. His father wasn't just calling, he was sending reinforcements. "Tell him I'm in a meeting," Sebastian said without turning around. "Actually," the nurse continued, "he's asking for Dr. Pierce specifically. He says there's been some kind of emergency with insurance paperwork, and he needs her to sign some documents immediately." Rowan frowned. "What documents? My insurance is through the hospital." Sebastian's blood ran cold. He knew his father's tactics well enough to recognize a manipulation in progress. "Don't sign anything," he said quickly, standing up. "Rowan, don't sign anything that man gives you." "Why would—" Understanding dawned on her face. "You think this is another one of your father's games?" "I know it is." Sebastian moved toward the door. "Stay here. I'll handle this." But before he could leave, the door opened wider, and a man in an expensive suit stepped into the room. Sebastian recognized him immediately. David Chen, one of his father's most ruthless attorneys. "Mr. Caldwell," Chen said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "your father has been looking for you. Get out." "I'm afraid I have some urgent paperwork for Dr. Pierce." Chen held up a leather portfolio. "Regarding her son's birth certificate and medical records, there seems to be some confusion about paternity that needs to be cleared up immediately." Rowan's arms tightened protectively around James. "What are you talking about?" "According to our records," Chen continued smoothly, "you listed Mr. Caldwell as the father, but given that he's been engaged to another woman for the past 6 months, there are some legal complications we need to address." Sebastian stepped between Chen and Rowan's bed. "You have 30 seconds to get out of this room before I call security." "Sebastian, please." Chen's tone was patronizing. "Your father is only trying to protect the family's interests. Surely you can understand that. The only thing I understand is that you're harassing a woman who just gave birth. I'm simply here to offer a solution that benefits everyone involved." Chen opened the portfolio and pulled out several documents. "Dr. Pierce, if you'll sign these papers, we can arrange for a generous monthly payment to help with the child's expenses. All we ask in return is your agreement that Mr. Caldwell has no parental rights or responsibilities." The room went dead silent. Sebastian felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. His father wasn't just trying to manage a scandal. He was trying to erase Sebastian's son entirely. "How much?" Rowan asked quietly. "Rowan, no." Sebastian started. "How much is my silence worth to the Caldwell family?" she repeated, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. Chen smiled, misinterpreting her question. "We're prepared to offer $50,000 a year until the child reaches 18, plus immediate payment of all medical expenses and a college fund. Almost $1 million total," Rowan mused. "That's quite generous for a family that doesn't believe this child belongs to them." Sebastian realized what she was doing, using her medical training to gather information, to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. "There's just one small detail," Chen continued. "You would need to agree never to contact Mr. Caldwell or any member of his family again. And of course, you'd need to sign a confidentiality agreement regarding your previous relationship." "Of course." Rowan's voice was ice cold. "And if I refuse?" Chen's smile faltered slightly. "I would hate for there to be any complications with your medical license, Dr. Pierce. Sometimes these situations can become quite messy." That was the moment Sebastian snapped. He grabbed Chen by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the hospital room wall, his face inches from the attorney's. "Did you just threaten her?" Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. "Sebastian, I'm simply—" "Did you just threaten the mother of my child?" Chen's eyes widened. He'd clearly expected Sebastian to be an ally in this negotiation, not an obstacle. "Mr. Caldwell, your father specifically instructed me. I don't care what my father instructed you." Sebastian's grip tightened. "You're going to take your documents and your threats and get out of this hospital. And if you ever come near Dr. Pierce or my son again, I will destroy you and every client you've ever had." "Your son?" Chen's voice was strangled. "Sebastian, you can't be serious. Your wedding is in 4 months. The merger depends on—" "The merger can go to hell." Sebastian released Chen, who stumbled backward, straightening his suit with shaking hands. "Your father isn't going to like this," Chen warned. "Then my father and I are going to have a very interesting conversation." After Chen left, the room was quiet, except for the soft sounds of James starting to fuss. Sebastian turned back to Rowan, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Well," she said finally, "that was certainly dramatic. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. But Sebastian, you just declared war on your own family." "No." Sebastian sat back down beside her bed. "I just remembered who I am when I'm not being told who to be." Rowan looked down at James, who was making increasingly urgent sounds. He's hungry. I need to feed him. Sebastian started to stand. I'll go. Stay. The word came out soft but firm. If you really mean what you just said, if you really want to be his father, then stay. Learn what that actually means. Sebastian sat back down, his heart pounding. Rowan adjusted her hospital gown and positioned James for feeding, her movements natural and sure despite being barely 12 hours into motherhood. Watching her, Sebastian felt something he'd never experienced before, a love so fierce and protective it made his chest ache. This was his family. His phone rang again, and this time when Sebastian looked at the screen, he wasn't surprised to see his father's name. He answered on the first ring. Hello, Dad. Sebastian, what the hell do you think you're doing? Sebastian looked at Rowan peacefully feeding their son in the afternoon light streaming through the hospital window. I'm learning how to be a father, he said quietly, something you never quite figured out. And for the first time in his adult life, Sebastian Caldwell hung up on his father and turned off his phone. The war for his future had officially begun. The silence in room 218 felt sacred after the chaos of the last hour. Sebastian watched Rowan gently burp James against her shoulder, her hand moving in small soothing circles on the baby's back. Everything about the scene was so natural, so perfectly right, that it made the artificiality of his entire life painfully obvious. You're staring, Rowan said softly, not looking at him. I'm learning. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to relax for the first time in months. I missed this. All of it. The pregnancy, the preparations, the anticipation. You missed it by choice. I missed it because I was an idiot who believed lies. He paused. But you're right. I made that choice, and I have to live with it. James let out a small burp, and despite everything, both Sebastian and Rowan smiled. He's got good timing, Sebastian observed. He's been very well behaved so far. The nurses say most newborns are much fussier. Rowan settled James back in her arms, and he immediately began to drift off to sleep again, though I suspect that will change once we get home and he realizes this is permanent. Home. Sebastian said the word like he was testing how it tasted. Where is home now? I have an apartment in Stamford. 2 bedrooms close to the hospital. Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. Nothing fancy, but it's enough for us. Sebastian tried to picture it. Rowan coming home exhausted from long shifts, feeding James in the middle of the night, managing everything alone while Sebastian had been playing house with Miranda and planning a wedding he never wanted. You've been doing this all by yourself. I had help. My mother came up from Virginia for the last month. My colleague Sarah from the pediatric unit has been amazing. She's the one who drove me to the hospital when my contractions started. Rowan adjusted the blanket around James. I wasn't completely alone. But Sebastian heard what she didn't say, that she should have had him, that she should have had the father of her child holding her hand through labor, helping her set up the nursery, sharing the wonder and terror of becoming parents together. Rowan, I want to be part of this. I know I have no right to ask, and I know I have to earn it, but I want to be his father, really be his father. What does that look like to you? Her question was clinical, but Sebastian could hear the hope she was trying to hide. Because if this is some romantic fantasy about playing house when it's convenient for you, it's not. Sebastian's voice was firm. I want midnight feedings and diaper changes and teething and temper tantrums. I want school plays and soccer practices and helping with homework. I want to teach him how to drive and how to treat people with respect and how to stand up for what he believes in. He paused, looking at his sleeping son. I want to be the kind of father who shows him that love is worth fighting for, even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, studying Sebastian's face. And what about us? Where do I fit into this vision? That depends on you. Sebastian, I know I hurt you in the worst possible way. I know that trust once broken doesn't just magically repair itself. But Rowan, I love you. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Before Rowan could respond, there was another knock on the door. This time it opened to reveal a woman Sebastian didn't recognize, mid-50s, with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a floral dress under a winter coat. Mom? Rowan's face lit up. I thought you were driving back to Virginia tonight. I was, but I got a call from the nurses' station. The woman's eyes moved from Rowan to Sebastian, and her expression grew cautious. They said there had been some complications. Legal issues? Mom, this is Sebastian. Rowan's voice was careful. Sebastian, this is my mother, Dr. Elizabeth Pierce. Sebastian stood immediately, extending his hand. Dr. Pierce, I know who you are. Elizabeth's voice was polite but cool. She shook his hand briefly, then moved to her daughter's side. Rowan, are you all right? The nurse was very vague about what happened. Sebastian's father sent a lawyer. There were threats. Rowan's voice was steady, but Sebastian could see the tension in her shoulders. Sebastian handled it. Elizabeth's eyes sharpened as she looked at him. Handled it how? I made it clear that no one threatens my family, Sebastian said quietly. Your family. Elizabeth's tone was skeptical. Interesting choice of words for a man who's engaged to someone else. Mom, Rowan started. No, it's okay, Sebastian interrupted. Dr. Pierce, you have every right to be suspicious of me. I hurt your daughter badly, and I abandoned her when she needed support most. If I were in your position, I'd probably want to throw me out of this hospital. Elizabeth studied him for a moment. And yet here you are. Here I am. Why? Why now, after all this time? Sebastian looked at Rowan, who nodded slightly. Permission to be honest. Because I found out the truth about why we broke up. Because I realized that everything I believed about Rowan was a lie planted by my father. Because I just met my son for the first time. His voice grew stronger. And because I can't spend another day living a life that isn't mine. Your son. Elizabeth moved closer to examine James, her grandmother's instincts overriding her protective anger. He does look like you. I'll give you that. Mom, Rowan said softly. Sebastian wants to be involved. He wants to be a father to James. And what about you, sweetheart? What do you want? It was the question Sebastian had been afraid to ask directly. He held his breath, waiting for Rowan's answer. I want... Rowan looked down at James, then at Sebastian, then at her mother. I want what's best for him, but I also want to not spend the next 18 years wondering if Sebastian is going to change his mind again when things get difficult. Fair enough, Elizabeth said. So what's your plan, Mr. Caldwell? How do you intend to prove you're serious about this? I'm ending my engagement to Miranda Whitlow. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. When? Today, as soon as I leave here. And your family's reaction to that? Sebastian thought about his father's phone call, about David Chen's threats, about the war that was probably already being planned in the executive offices of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. They'll try to destroy me. Financially, socially, professionally. My father will probably cut me off entirely and find a way to force me out of the company. Are you prepared for that? I have to be. Elizabeth walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. You know, when Rowan was little, maybe 5 years old, she found a bird with a broken wing in our backyard. She was convinced she could fix it, so she made a little nest in a shoebox and fed it with an eyedropper every few hours for weeks. Sebastian glanced at Rowan, who was listening with a small smile. I kept telling her the bird probably wouldn't survive, that sometimes things are too broken to fix. But she was so determined, so sure that love and patience could heal anything. Elizabeth turned back to face them. The bird did survive eventually, but it took months of consistent care, and even then, it never flew quite the same way. Mom, what's your point? Rowan asked. My point is that some things can be healed, but they require more than good intentions. They require showing up, day after day, even when it's difficult, even when progress is slow, even when everyone else is telling you it's hopeless. Elizabeth looked directly at Sebastian. The question isn't whether you love my daughter and grandson. The question is whether you're prepared to do the work of loving them consistently for the rest of your life. I am, Sebastian said without hesitation. We'll see. Elizabeth's tone was neutral, but Sebastian caught the slight softening around her eyes. Rowan, what do you need from me? Can you stay until tomorrow? Just until I get discharged and settled at home? Of course. Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hand. I'll go get some coffee and let you two talk. Mr. Caldwell, walk with me. It wasn't a request. Sebastian followed Elizabeth into the hallway, his stomach tight with apprehension. Let me be very clear about something, Elizabeth said once they were out of earshot. My daughter is the strongest person I know. She rebuilt her entire life after you left her. She finished her residency while pregnant, found a new apartment, prepared for single motherhood, and never once complained or asked for anything she couldn't provide herself. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're asking her to risk everything she's built on the chance that you might be different this time. Sebastian felt the weight of that accusation. Dr. Pierce, I can't change what I did 8 months ago. I can only try to prove that I've learned from it. How? By being here. By showing up for James, for Rowan every single day. By choosing them over my family, over money, over everything that I thought mattered before. Elizabeth studied his face for a long moment. You know, there's something you should understand about my daughter. She doesn't give second chances lightly. If she lets you back into her life, into James's life, it will be because she believes you've genuinely changed. But if you hurt her again, I won't. If you hurt her again, Elizabeth continued as if he hadn't spoken, I will personally make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Elizabeth nodded sharply. Good. Now, you have some phone calls to make, don't you? Sebastian's stomach dropped as he realized what she meant. Miranda, his father, the wedding that was supposed to happen in 4 months. Yes, I do. Then I suggest you make them before you lose your nerve. Sebastian pulled out his phone, looking at the screen full of missed calls and text messages. Miranda had called 6 more times. His father had called 12. There were texts from his assistant, his business partners, his wedding planner. Everyone wanted to know where he was. Soon they'd all know exactly where he stood. Sebastian scrolled to Miranda's number and hit call. She answered on the first ring. Sebastian, where have you been? I've been worried sick and Mom is practically having a panic attack. The nurses won't tell us anything and… Miranda, I need to talk to you. Well, yes, obviously. Can you please just come back to my room? This whole disappearing act is very unlike you. Sebastian looked back at the door to room 218 where his son was sleeping in his mother's arms. I can't do that. What do you mean you can't? Sebastian, what's going on? I mean, I can't marry you. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched out for what felt like forever. I'm sorry. What did you just say? I can't marry you, Miranda. The engagement is over. And with those words, Sebastian Caldwell officially burned down his old life to build something real. You're breaking up with me over the phone? Miranda's voice rose to a pitch that made Sebastian hold the device away from his ear. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Sebastian, you're scaring me. Through the hospital window, Sebastian watched snow continue to fall, each flake catching the afternoon light before disappearing into the growing blanket of white. It felt symbolic somehow, the old world being covered, made clean, ready for something new to grow. I'm not having a breakdown, he said quietly. I'm finally thinking clearly. This is about that woman, isn't it? That doctor you used to date? Miranda's voice turned sharp, calculating. Sebastian, whatever she told you, whatever lies she's filling your head with, she didn't tell me anything. She didn't have to. Then what? What could possibly make you throw away everything we've built together? The wedding, the merger, our future? Sebastian almost laughed at the word built. What had they built exactly? A series of public appearances? A collection of engagement photos that would look perfect in the society pages? A relationship that existed primarily in other people's expectations? Miranda, can you honestly tell me that you love me? The question seemed to catch her off guard. There was a long pause before she answered. Of course I love you. We're getting married in 4 months. That's not what I asked. Another pause, longer this time. Sebastian, love is what we have. Compatibility, shared goals, mutual respect. What about passion? What about feeling like you can't breathe when the other person walks into a room? What about lying awake at night thinking about them, missing them even when they're sleeping right next to you? That's fantasy, Sebastian. Fairy tale nonsense. Real relationships are built on more practical foundations. And there it was. The fundamental difference between what Sebastian had with Miranda and what he'd had with Rowan. One was a business arrangement dressed up as love. The other was love so real it had survived 8 months of separation and manipulation. You deserve someone who sees you as more than a practical choice, Sebastian said gently. And I deserve someone who makes me feel alive. This is insane. Miranda's voice was getting higher, more frantic. You're throwing away your entire life for some romantic delusion. My father is going to do whatever he thinks will bring me back in line. But Miranda, I'm done being controlled. Sebastian, please, can we at least talk about this in person? Come back to my room and we can discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. What about the wedding, the deposits, the guests who've already made travel arrangements? Sebastian thought about all the planning that had gone into their wedding, the venue his mother had selected, the flowers Miranda's mother had chosen, the guest list that read like a who's who of East Coast society. None of it had felt like his wedding. It had felt like a performance he was expected to give, I'll handle the financial arrangements. You don't need to worry about any of that. I don't care about the money. Miranda's composure finally cracked completely. Sebastian, I'm in love with you. I have been since we were children. Our families have been planning this union for years. You can't just... She was crying now, and Sebastian felt a stab of genuine regret, not for ending the engagement, but for letting it go on so long when he'd known from the beginning that his heart wasn't in it. Miranda, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for hurting you. But I can't marry you when I'm in love with someone else. Someone else who already destroyed you once. Someone else who I destroyed by believing lies about her. And what happens when she destroys you again? What happens when you realize you've thrown away your entire life for someone who doesn't even want you back? It was a fair question, and one that Sebastian had been afraid to ask himself. What if Rowan couldn't forgive him? What if the damage he'd done was too severe to repair? What if he lost everything and gained nothing? Then at least I'll know I fought for something real, he said finally. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Miranda spoke again, her voice was cold. You're going to regret this, Sebastian. When your father cuts you off, when your friends turn their backs on you, when you realize what you've given up, you're going to regret this. Maybe. But I already regret not fighting for her 8 months ago. I can't live with that regret anymore. Fine. Miranda's voice was ice. But don't come crawling back to me when this fantasy falls apart. And don't expect my family to just forget about the humiliation you've caused us. The line went dead. Sebastian stared at his phone for a moment, then deleted Miranda's contact information. It felt like closing a door he should never have opened in the first place. Elizabeth Pierce appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria. How did that go? She asked, offering him one of the cups. About as well as you'd expect. Sebastian accepted the coffee gratefully, though better than the next call is going to go. Your father? My father. Elizabeth nodded sympathetically. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. It would have been cruel to marry that girl when your heart belongs to someone else. Even if Rowan never forgives me? Especially then. Elizabeth took a sip of her coffee, making a face at the bitter taste. Sebastian, can I ask you something personal? After the conversation we just had, I think we're past formal boundaries. Why did you believe your father's lies about Rowan? You lived with her for 2 years. You knew her character. What made you think she was capable of deception? Sebastian had been asking himself the same question for months. Fear, I think. Fear that something that felt too good to be true probably was. Fear of what specifically? Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of needing someone that much. Sebastian paused, thinking. My father raised me to believe that emotional dependence was weakness, that successful men don't let their hearts override their judgment. And you thought loving Rowan made you weak? I thought it made me stupid, reckless. When she told me she was pregnant, instead of feeling joy, I felt trapped, not because I didn't want a family with her, but because I was terrified of how much I wanted it. Elizabeth nodded slowly. And your father exploited that fear. He's very good at finding people's weaknesses and using them. Sebastian's phone buzzed with another call from his father. He declined it. He probably already knows about the baby, about Rowan, about everything. So what's your plan? Face him. Tell him the truth. Probably get disowned in the process. Are you prepared for that? Sebastian thought about his trust fund, his position at Caldwell Pharmaceuticals, the life of luxury and privilege that had never actually made him happy. I have medical training. I finished my MD before I went into business. I can always go back to practicing medicine if I have to. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. You're a doctor. Pediatric surgery, actually, though I haven't practiced in years. Interesting. Elizabeth smiled for the first time since meeting him. Rowan doesn't know that, does she? It never came up. When we met, I was already running the pharmaceutical division. You might want to mention it to her. She has great respect for people who choose medicine over money. Sebastian's phone rang again. This time it wasn't his father. It was his assistant, probably calling with increasingly frantic messages about missed meetings and concerned board members. I should probably take this, he said apologetically. Sebastian, his assistant's voice was tight with stress. Where are you? Your father has been calling the office every 10 minutes and the Whitlow family lawyer called demanding to speak with you immediately. I'm at the hospital. Are you all right? Is it Miranda's surgery? Did something go wrong? It's not Miranda, it's... Sebastian paused, realizing he was about to make this official. It's my son. He was born this morning. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Your... son? His assistant's voice was carefully neutral. Sir, how should I handle the calls from your father? Tell him I'll speak with him when I'm ready. Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week. The board meeting tomorrow. Cancelled. The merger discussion with the Germans. Postponed. Sir, I have to tell you, there are rumors circulating. People are asking questions about your engagement, about where you've been today. Mr. Chen apparently had some kind of incident here at the hospital. Word traveled fast in their circles. By tomorrow, the entire pharmaceutical industry would know that Sebastian Caldwell had caused a scene at a hospital and disappeared from his fiancée's bedside. Handle the rumors however you see fit, Sebastian said, but make it clear that I'm taking time to deal with a personal matter. Of course. And sir? Congratulations. On your son. Sebastian felt a smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. Thank you. He hung up and turned to find Elizabeth watching him with an expression that was almost approving. You're really doing this, she said. You're really choosing them over everything else. I'm choosing love over fear. Finally. Good. Elizabeth's smile was warmer now. Because Rowan is going to need someone who's absolutely certain. Motherhood makes us fierce, protective. If she senses any hesitation, any doubt, there's no doubt. Sebastian's voice was firm. Not anymore. Then I think, Elizabeth said, it's time you went back in there and met your son properly. Sebastian nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. In that room was everything he'd ever wanted. A woman who challenged him to be better. A child who represented hope and possibility. A future that was uncertain, but real. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from his father. Whatever you think you're doing, stop, we need to talk now. Sebastian deleted the message without responding. Some conversations could wait. His family, his real family, couldn't. When Sebastian returned to room 218, he found Rowan sitting up in bed, looking more alert despite the exhaustion that shadowed her eyes. James was awake now, making soft sounds and moving his tiny fists in the air, as if he was conducting an invisible orchestra. How did it go? Rowan asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer from his expression. It's done. The engagement is over. Rowan nodded slowly, processing this information. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, free. Sebastian moved to the chair beside her bed but remained standing. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure if there's water at the bottom. And your father? That conversation is still coming. Sebastian's phone had been buzzing almost constantly, but he'd learned to ignore it. Right now I want to focus on what matters. He gestured toward James, who was looking around the room with the unfocused but alert gaze of a newborn taking in his new world. Can I? Sebastian's voice caught slightly. Can I hold him now? Rowan studied his face for a long moment and Sebastian could see her weighing everything. His words against his actions, his promises against his past mistakes, her own fierce protective instincts against the possibility of hope. Sit down first, she said finally, and wash your hands at the sink. Sebastian's heart jumped. He moved quickly to the small sink in the corner of the room, scrubbing his hands thoroughly while trying to keep the grin off his face. When he turned back, Rowan was carefully adjusting James's blanket. Support his head, she instructed as Sebastian settled into the chair beside her. Newborns don't have the neck strength to hold their heads up yet. I know, Sebastian said softly. I did my pediatric rotation. Rowan's eyebrows shot up. Your what? Your mother didn't tell you? I'm a doctor. Pediatric surgery specifically, though I haven't practiced in years. You're a... Rowan stared at him. Sebastian, in 2 years together, you never once mentioned that you were a doctor. It never seemed relevant. By the time we met, I was already running the pharmaceutical division. The medical degree felt like ancient history. Ancient history? Rowan's voice was incredulous. You spent 4 years in medical school, presumably years in residency, learning to save children's lives, and you think that's not relevant? Sebastian paused in the middle of reaching for James, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what he'd never shared with her. Rowan, why did you give it up? The question hung in the air between them. Sebastian had spent years avoiding that answer, even to himself. My father needed me in the business. The company was expanding, and he said I had a responsibility to the family legacy. Sebastian's voice was quiet. He said I could help more children by developing better medications than I ever could by operating on them one at a time. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting that I gave up my dreams for his approval. Rowan was quiet for a moment, clearly processing this revelation. Do you miss it? Medicine? Every day. The admission came out more raw than Sebastian had intended. Every day I miss the feeling of actually making a difference, of using my hands to heal instead of just managing spreadsheets and attending board meetings. Then why didn't you go back? Because by the time I realized what I'd given up, I was already trapped in the life my father had planned for me. The golden handcuffs were too tight. James made a small sound, and both Sebastian and Rowan looked down at him. "He's listening to us," Rowan observed. "Babies are more aware than people think, even this young." "Then I should probably introduce myself properly." Sebastian's voice was gentle as he looked at his son. "Hi, James. I'm your father. I know I wasn't here for your birth, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." "Sebastian," Rowan said softly, "you can hold him." With infinite care, Sebastian reached out and lifted his son from Rowan's arms. James was lighter than he'd expected, but somehow felt substantial, real in a way that made Sebastian's chest tighten with emotion. "He's so small," Sebastian whispered, adjusting his hold to better support the baby's head. James looked up at him with those gray eyes that were unmistakably Sebastian's own, and something fundamental shifted in Sebastian's chest. This was his child, his son, the product of love between him and the woman he'd never stopped loving, no matter how hard he'd tried to convince himself otherwise. "Hello, little man," Sebastian murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're perfect, aren't you?" James seemed to focus on Sebastian's face, his tiny hand working its way free of the blanket to wave in the air. "He knows you," Rowan said softly. "He can hear your voice. They say babies can recognize their father's voice from the womb if they hear it enough. But he never heard mine." "Yes, he did." Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to play voicemails you'd left me, before everything fell apart. I would lie in bed at night, when I was scared about doing this alone, and I'd play recordings of your voice. I told myself I was just being silly, but..." Sebastian looked at her, his heart breaking. "Rowan, but part of me hoped that somehow you'd come back, that you'd realize the accusations were wrong and you'd come looking for us. I should have trusted what we had instead of trusting my father's manipulation." James made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and both parents looked down at him. "He's falling asleep again," Rowan observed. "Newborns sleep about 16 hours a day for the first few weeks." Sebastian adjusted his hold slightly, marveling at how natural it felt to have his son in his arms. "What was it like? The pregnancy, I mean. Being alone through all of it." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "Lonely. Especially in the beginning when I was still hoping you'd call. There were so many moments I wanted to share with you. The first time I felt him move, the first ultrasound where we could see his features clearly, when I found out it was a boy." "You knew it was a boy?" "For the last 4 months. I had a name picked out by week 20. James Oliver." Sebastian tested the name. "Why Oliver?" "It was my grandfather's middle name. He was the one who encouraged me to become a doctor, even when everyone else was telling me it was too competitive, too demanding for a woman." Rowan smiled at the memory. "He said healing was a calling, not a career choice. He sounds like a wise man. He would have loved you. The doctor I mean. He always said the best physicians were the ones who understood that medicine was about more than just technical skill." Sebastian felt James's weight shift slightly as the baby relaxed completely into sleep. The trust implicit in that surrender, the way his son felt completely safe in his arms, was overwhelming. "Rowan, I want to come back to medicine." She looked at him sharply. "What?" "I want to go back to practicing, to surgery, to actually making a difference instead of just making money." Sebastian's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I want to be the kind of man our son can be proud of. The kind of man you fell in love with before I let my father turn me into someone else." "Sebastian, you can't just walk away from Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. It's your family's legacy." "It's my father's legacy, not mine." Sebastian looked down at James, then back at Rowan. "This is my legacy, this little boy, and hopefully the family we can build together if you'll let us try. Even if it means giving up everything? Your fortune, your position, your family's approval? Especially then." Rowan was quiet for a long time, studying Sebastian's face as if she was trying to read his sincerity in the lines around his eyes. "There's a position opening up in the pediatric surgery department here," she said finally. "Dr. Hartman is retiring next month." Sebastian's heart jumped. "Are you serious?" "The salary would be about 2% of what you probably make now. The hours are brutal. The administration is a nightmare, and you'd have to recertify since you haven't practiced in so long. I don't care about any of that. And," Rowan continued, You'd be working in the same hospital where I work. We'd see each other every day. Is that a problem? I don't know yet. Her honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. Sebastian, I can't just flip a switch and trust you again. Even if I wanted to. Even if I believe that you've changed. Healing takes time. I understand. Do you? Because if we're going to try this, if we're going to try to be a family, I need to know that you're prepared for it to be complicated. Messy. Nothing like the neat, organized life you're used to. Sebastian looked around the hospital room. At Rowan in her simple gown, exhausted but radiant. At James sleeping peacefully in his arms. At the modest flowers and handwritten cards from friends who had supported Rowan through the pregnancy he'd missed. This was real. This was human. This was everything his carefully controlled life had been missing. I want complicated, he said quietly. I want messy. I want real. Even if it's hard. Even if your father disowns you. Even if your friends don't understand. Even if you lose everything you thought mattered. Sebastian adjusted James slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to his son's forehead. I already lost everything that mattered once. I'm not making that mistake again. Rowan's eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't try to hide them. Okay, she said softly. Okay, okay. We can try. Slowly, carefully, one day at a time. Sebastian felt like he could breathe properly for the first time in 8 months. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Good, Sebastian said, looking down at his sleeping son. The best things always are. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the old world and making way for something new. And in room 218 of St. Mary's Medical Center, a family began the slow, careful work of healing and rebuilding. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be real. Sebastian had been holding James for nearly an hour when the storm arrived. It came in the form of Richard Caldwell himself, striding through the hospital corridors like a man accustomed to having doors opened for him and obstacles cleared from his path. At 63, he was still an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that made hospital staff step aside without question. He found room 218 without asking for directions. The knock on the door was sharp, authoritative, and entirely unwelcome. "Come in," Rowan called out before Sebastian could stop her. Richard Caldwell entered the room like a force of nature, his steel-gray eyes, so much like Sebastian's own, taking in the scene before him with cold calculation. His gaze moved from Rowan in her hospital bed, to Sebastian holding the baby, to the modest flowers and get-well cards that spoke of a life far removed from Caldwell luxury. "So," Richard said, his voice carrying the tone of a man delivering a medical diagnosis. "This is where you've been hiding." "Hello, Father." Sebastian's voice was steady, but Rowan could see the tension radiating through his shoulders. "I wasn't hiding. I was meeting my son." Richard's eyes flicked to the baby in Sebastian's arms, and for just a moment, something that might have been recognition crossed his features, but it was quickly replaced by his usual mask of controlled disapproval. "Your alleged son?" The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sebastian's arms tightened protectively around James, who stirred at the sudden tension in his father's body. "There's nothing alleged about it," Sebastian said quietly. "Look at him, Dad. Really look at him." "What I see," Richard replied, moving closer, "is a young woman who has successfully manipulated my son into destroying his entire future for a child that could belong to anyone." "Mr. Caldwell." Rowan's voice was ice cold, her medical training helping her maintain composure even in the face of such casual cruelty. "I think you should leave. I think, Dr. Pierce, that you should understand exactly what you've done." Richard turned his attention to her fully, and Rowan felt the full weight of his intimidating presence. "Do you have any idea what your little reunion has cost? The engagement you've destroyed, the merger you've jeopardized, the reputation you've damaged?" "I didn't destroy anything," Rowan replied firmly. "Your son made his own choices." "My son," Richard said with barely contained fury, "has been under tremendous stress lately. The pressure of running a pharmaceutical empire, planning a wedding, managing family expectations. Clearly, he's not thinking rationally." "I'm thinking more rationally than I have in years," Sebastian interjected, but his father continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The Whitlow family is understandably furious. Miranda is devastated. The merger with their biotech division, worth approximately $2 billion, is now in serious jeopardy." Richard's voice grew colder with each word. "All because you've convinced my son that this child is his." "The child is his," Rowan said, her own anger finally breaking through her professional composure. And I didn't convince him of anything. I never even told him I was pregnant until it was too late to matter. How convenient. Convenient. Rowan's voice rose slightly, causing James to stir in Sebastian's arms. You think it was convenient for me to go through pregnancy alone? To handle morning sickness while working 12-hour shifts? To prepare for childbirth without the father there for support? You chose that path when you decided to pursue my son. I chose that path when your son accused me of carrying another man's child and walked out of my life. The room fell silent except for James's soft breathing and the distant sounds of hospital activity in the hallway. Richard studied Rowan for a long moment, and she could see him reassessing her. This wasn't the gold-digging opportunist he'd expected to find. This was a successful doctor who had clearly managed just fine without Caldwell money or influence. Dr. Pierce, Richard said, his tone shifting slightly. You seem like an intelligent woman. Surely you can understand that Sebastian's current, emotional state isn't permanent. He's reacting to stress, to guilt, to the shock of discovering he might be a father. Might be? Sebastian's voice was dangerous. When he's had time to think clearly, Richard continued, ignoring his son, he'll remember what his responsibilities are. To his family, to the company, to the thousands of people who depend on Caldwell Pharmaceuticals for their livelihoods. And to his son? Rowan asked quietly. If that child is indeed his, and I'm not convinced it is, then appropriate financial arrangements can be made, discreetly, without destroying everything Sebastian has worked for. Sebastian stood up carefully, still holding James, his face a mask of controlled fury that was terrifyingly similar to his father's expression. Appropriate financial arrangements? Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. You're talking about my son like he's a business liability to be managed. I'm talking about protecting our family's interests while ensuring this child, regardless of paternity, receives proper support. His paternity isn't in question, isn't it? Richard pulled out his phone and showed Sebastian the screen. I had David Chen do some research after his unfortunate encounter with you earlier. Dr. Matthews, the colleague you were so concerned about 8 months ago, he's been very helpful in providing information about Dr. Pierce's social activities during the relevant time period. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. What are you talking about? Hospital security footage, dinner dates, late-night consultations, text messages. Richard's smile was cold. Amazing what people remember when they're properly motivated to share information. Sebastian stared at his father, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. You orchestrated everything, not just the photos that didn't exist. You created an entire narrative. I protected this family from a fortune hunter. She's a doctor, she doesn't need our money. Everyone needs something, Sebastian. For Dr. Pierce, it was social elevation, access to circles she could never reach on a resident's salary. That's not true, Rowan said, but her voice lacked its earlier strength. She could see how the situation looked from an outsider's perspective, especially one determined to find fault. Richard sensed her uncertainty and pressed his advantage. Sebastian, think logically. You dated for 2 years, yet she never once mentioned wanting children, never discussed marriage seriously. Then suddenly, when your relationship is rocky, she announces a pregnancy. Our relationship wasn't rocky, wasn't it? You'd been fighting about your different backgrounds, your incompatible goals. Your mother mentioned how stressed you seemed during family dinners. Sebastian felt doubt creeping in despite himself. Had there been signs he'd missed? Had Rowan been playing a longer game than he'd realized? Rowan saw the uncertainty in Sebastian's eyes and felt her heart break all over again. After everything they'd shared in this room, after his declarations of love and commitment, he was still capable of doubt when his father applied the right pressure. Sebastian, she said quietly, if you have questions about James's paternity, we can do a DNA test. Right now if you want. That won't be necessary, Sebastian said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held an hour earlier. Won't it? Richard's voice was smooth. Surely for everyone's peace of mind. Yes, Rowan interrupted, her voice growing stronger. Let's do it. Let's settle this once and for all. She reached for the phone beside her bed and dialed the nurse's station. This is Dr. Pierce in room 218. I need to request a paternity test for my son. Immediately. The room fell silent as they waited for a nurse to arrive with the necessary supplies. James, oblivious to the drama surrounding him, slept peacefully in his father's increasingly tense arms. This is ridiculous, Sebastian muttered, but he didn't stop the process. A young nurse arrived with a DNA testing kit, explaining the simple cheek swab procedure that would provide results within hours. Sebastian submitted to the test with visible reluctance, as if participating was somehow a betrayal of the trust he'd been rebuilding with Rowan. "There," Rowan said as the nurse left with the samples. "In a few hours we'll have scientific proof of what I've been telling you all along." "And when the results confirm what I've suspected?" Richard asked calmly. "Then you'll owe Dr. Pierce an apology," Sebastian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Richard smiled. "And if they don't? If this child proves to be the product of one of Dr. Pierce's other relationships? What then, Sebastian?" The question hung in the air like poison. Sebastian looked down at James, searching the baby's sleeping face for absolute certainty that seemed just out of reach. The gray eyes, the nose shape, the way the baby's hand curled around Sebastian's finger. It all seemed so obvious before his father arrived. "But now, the results will show he's yours," Rowan said quietly, but Sebastian could hear the hurt in her voice. Hurt that he still needed proof, hurt that his father's words could shake his faith so easily. "I'm sure they will," Sebastian replied, but the words felt hollow. Richard Caldwell smiled, recognizing that he'd successfully planted seeds of doubt that would continue growing regardless of what the test results showed. "Well then," he said, straightening his expensive coat, "I suppose we'll know soon enough. Sebastian, when you're ready to discuss this situation rationally, I'll be at the office." He paused at the door, turning back for one final assault. "Oh, and Dr. Pierce? Regardless of what those test results show, I want you to understand something very clearly. If you think you can use this child, whoever his father may be, to manipulate my son into abandoning his responsibilities, you're gravely mistaken. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. The Caldwell family protects its own. We always have, and we don't respond well to threats." With that, Richard left, leaving behind a room that felt poisoned by suspicion and doubt. Sebastian continued holding James, but something fundamental had shifted. The easy intimacy of the previous hour had been replaced by tension and uncertainty. "Sebastian," Rowan said softly, "you know he's yours." "Yes," Sebastian replied, but his voice was hollow. "I do know that." But even as he said the words, Rowan could see the damage Richard had done. The carefully rebuilt trust between them was cracking under the weight of deliberately planted doubts. And James, innocent and unaware, slept in his father's arms while his future hung in the balance of a test that would prove what love should have made unnecessary. 3 hours felt like 3 years. Sebastian sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He'd left Rowan's room after the tension became unbearable, every word between them careful, measured, loaded with the weight of doubt that his father had so expertly planted. The waiting was agony. Rowan had insisted on the DNA test to clear the air once and for all, but Sebastian knew that some damage couldn't be undone by science. The fact that he'd needed proof, that his father's manipulation had worked even after everything they'd shared, was a betrayal that would be hard to forgive. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from his assistant, calls from business partners, texts from society friends who'd heard about the broken engagement. The Caldwell scandal was spreading through Manhattan's elite circles like wildfire, but Sebastian ignored it all. At 4:47 p.m., Dr. Foster found him in the cafeteria. "Sebastian?" Her voice was gentle. "The results are in." His heart hammered against his ribs as he followed her through the hospital corridors. With each step, he felt like he was walking toward either redemption or disaster. When they reached room 218, Sebastian found Elizabeth Pierce sitting beside her daughter's bed, holding James while Rowan dozed fitfully. The older woman looked up as they entered, her expression unreadable. "Where have you been?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "Rowan's been asking for you. I needed some air." Sebastian's voice was hoarse. "Is she—" "She's hurt, Sebastian. And exhausted. This kind of stress isn't good for a woman who just gave birth." The guilt hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been wallowing in doubt downstairs, Rowan had been dealing with the aftermath of his father's psychological warfare alone. Dr. Foster cleared her throat softly. "I have the paternity test results." Rowan's eyes opened immediately, any trace of sleep vanishing. Sebastian moved closer to her bed, his hands shaking slightly. "The test confirms," Dr. Foster said simply, "that Sebastian Caldwell is indeed the biological father of James Oliver Pierce. The probability is 99.97%. The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian felt his knees go weak. He'd known, somewhere deep in his heart he'd known, but hearing the scientific confirmation felt like a weight lifting from his chest and settling there at the same time. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking at Rowan. "God, Rowan, I'm so sorry." But Rowan's expression wasn't one of triumph or relief. It was exhausted sadness. "Are you?" she asked quietly. "Are you really sorry, Sebastian? Or are you just relieved that you don't have to choose between believing me and believing your father?" The question cut deep because it was fair. Sebastian had spent 3 hours in agony not because he truly doubted James was his son, but because he'd been afraid of what it would mean if his father was right. Afraid of looking foolish. Afraid of being manipulated. "I never should have doubted you. But you did. Even after everything we shared today. Even after holding your son and promising to fight for us the moment your father applied pressure. You cracked." Elizabeth stood up, still holding James. "I think I'll take my grandson for a walk while you two sort this out." After she left, the room felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. "Rowan, please. Let me explain." "Explain what? That you still don't trust me? That 8 months of believing your father's lies about me didn't teach you anything about who I really am?" Sebastian sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed. "It's not about not trusting you, it's about being terrified that I'm not strong enough to protect us from him." "What do you mean?" "My father has spent my entire life teaching me that emotional decisions are weak decisions, that successful men don't let their hearts override their judgment." Sebastian ran his hands through his hair, frustrated with his inability to articulate the psychological conditioning he'd endured. When he walked in here today, all those old patterns kicked in. The need to prove I was thinking rationally, not just being led by emotion. "So you decided you needed scientific proof that our son was actually yours." "I decided I needed to shut him up once and for all. I thought if we had irrefutable proof he'd have to back down." Rowan studied his face for a long moment. "Sebastian, your father isn't going to back down just because of a DNA test. This isn't about James's paternity. This is about control, about making sure you stay in line." As if summoned by her words, Sebastian's phone rang. Richard Caldwell's name appeared on the screen. Sebastian looked at Rowan, then at the phone. For a moment he considered declining the call, but something in Rowan's expression stopped him. "Answer it," she said quietly. "But put it on speaker. I want to hear what he has to say about those test results." Sebastian answered the call and activated the speaker function. "Sebastian." Richard's voice filled the room, smooth and confident. "I trust you've received the test results by now." "Yes." "And?" Sebastian looked at Rowan, who nodded encouragingly. "James is my son. The test confirmed 99.97% probability." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Richard spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. "I see. Well, that does complicate things." "Complicate things?" Sebastian's voice rose. "Dad, you spent the afternoon accusing the mother of my child of fraud. You questioned my judgment, attacked her character, and threatened her career. How does proof that you were completely wrong complicate things?" "Sebastian, you're being emotional again. Yes, the child is biologically yours, but that doesn't change the fundamental problem here, which is, you still have responsibilities. To the company, to the merger, to the life you've built." Richard's voice grew harder. "One night of passion 2 years ago doesn't erase a lifetime of obligations." Rowan's eyes flashed with anger, but she remained silent, letting Sebastian handle his father. "One night of passion?" Sebastian's voice was dangerous. "Dad, Rowan and I were together for 2 years. We were engaged. We were planning a life together before you destroyed it with your lies. I corrected a mistake before it became a catastrophe. You manipulated me into abandoning the woman I love and my unborn child. I prevented you from throwing away everything the Caldwell family has built for a relationship that was never going to last." Sebastian stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the December evening was settling over the hospital grounds, the snow still falling in soft, steady flakes. "How do you know it wasn't going to last?" "Because you're not the same people, Sebastian. She's a small-town doctor with middle-class values. You're the heir to a pharmaceutical empire with global responsibilities. The gap between your worlds would have torn you apart eventually. Or it would have made us stronger. Don't be naive." Sebastian turned back to look at Rowan, who was listening to every word with the focused attention of someone gathering intelligence about an enemy. "You know what, Dad? Maybe you're right. Maybe our relationship would have faced challenges because we come from different backgrounds. Of course I'm right. But that should have been our choice to make, our risk to take. Instead, you made the choice for us by lying to me about who Rowan really was. I protected you, You stole 8 months of my son's life from me. Sebastian's voice cracked with emotion. You stole my chance to be there when Rowan needed support during pregnancy. You stole my chance to be in the delivery room when James was born. You stole moments I can never get back. The line was quiet for a long moment. Sebastian, Richard said finally, his tone shifting to something almost like concern. I understand you're upset. This has been an emotional day for everyone. Why don't you come home tonight? We can discuss this rationally, plan how to move forward in a way that protects everyone's interests, including Rowan and James. Of course, appropriate arrangements can be made for the child's support and education, the best schools, proper medical care, perhaps a trust fund that kicks in when he reaches adulthood. Sebastian looked at Rowan, whose expression had grown cold. And what about Rowan? What appropriate arrangements did you have in mind for her? Dr. Pierce is a capable professional. I'm sure she'll continue her medical career successfully, discreetly, without any unnecessary complications for our family. Unnecessary complications. Sebastian repeated the phrase slowly. You mean without any acknowledgement that she's the mother of your grandson? Sebastian, be realistic. Your social circles, your business associations, your future in politics, they all depend on maintaining certain standards. Dr. Pierce is a lovely woman, I'm sure, but she's not suitable for the life you're meant to live. Rowan had heard enough. She leaned forward and spoke directly into the phone. Mr. Caldwell, this is Dr. Pierce. I have a question for you. Richard's surprise was audible in his brief pause. Dr. Pierce, if Sebastian walks away from your family business, if he chooses medicine over money and love over convenience, what exactly are you prepared to do about it? I beg your pardon? You've threatened my career, questioned my character, and attempted to bribe me into silence. You've manipulated your own son into abandoning his child. So I'm curious, if we refuse to play by your rules, what's your next move? The silence stretched out for nearly a full minute. Dr. Pierce, Richard said finally, his voice ice cold. I think you underestimate how much influence the Caldwell family has in this city, in the medical community, in circles that directly impact your future and your ability to provide for that child. Are you threatening me again? I'm simply pointing out that actions have consequences, and choosing to interfere with my family's stability would be unwise. Sebastian felt rage building in his chest, but before he could speak, Rowan held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Caldwell, let me tell you something about consequences. I'm a doctor at one of the most respected hospitals in the region. I have colleagues, mentors, and patients who respect my work. Your son is a trained pediatric surgeon who could practice at any hospital in the country if he chose to return to medicine. Your point? My point is that we don't need your money. We don't need your social connections. And we certainly don't need your approval. Rowan's voice grew stronger with each word. So you can threaten and manipulate and scheme all you want. But you can't force Sebastian to live the life you've planned for him anymore. He's a father now. And whether you like it or not, I'm the mother of your grandson. Dr. Pierce, I'm not finished. Rowan's voice cut through Richard's attempted interruption. You have a choice to make. You can continue this war against your own family, and you'll lose your son forever. Or you can accept that Sebastian is an adult who has the right to make his own decisions about love, career, and fatherhood. And if I choose the first option? Rowan looked at Sebastian, who nodded his support. Then you'll discover that the love between me and your son is stronger than your money, your threats, and your manipulation. And James will grow up knowing that his father chose love over fear, even when it cost him everything else. The line was quiet for a long moment. Sebastian, Richard said finally, are you really prepared to throw away everything for this woman and her child? Sebastian moved back to Rowan's bedside and took her hand. Dad, I'm prepared to throw away everything false to build something true. And they're not this woman and her child. They're my family. Then you've made your choice. Yes, I have. The call ended with a sharp click, leaving the room in profound silence. Sebastian and Rowan looked at each other, both understanding that they'd just declared war on one of the most powerful families in the pharmaceutical industry. Are you ready for this? Rowan asked quietly. Sebastian thought about the road ahead, the legal battles, the financial warfare, the social ostracism that would probably follow. Then he thought about James, sleeping peacefully in his grandmother's arms somewhere down the hall. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the old world completely. And in room 218, two people who loved each other, began planning a future that would require more courage than either of them had ever needed before. 6 weeks later, Sebastian sat in the parking lot of St. Mary's Medical Center, staring at the building that had become the center of his new world. Snow still covered the ground, but the February morning sun was bright, promising that winter wouldn't last forever. In the passenger seat beside him was a folder containing his signed contract to return to pediatric surgery. After 6 weeks of intensive recertification courses, medical board examinations, and more psychological evaluation than he'd endured in his entire life, he was finally ready to practice medicine again. Today was his first day back. His phone buzzed with a text from Rowan. "James is awake and fussy. Perfect timing for Daddy to come say goodbye before your first surgery." Sebastian smiled, pocketing the phone. 6 weeks of rebuilding trust, of learning to be a father, of discovering what real partnership looked like. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments, moments of doubt, long nights when James's crying had tested everyone's patience, but they'd done it together. As he walked through the hospital entrance, Sebastian barely recognized the man he'd been 2 months ago. Gone were the $1,000 suits and Italian leather shoes. In their place were comfortable scrubs and sneakers that could handle 12-hour shifts on his feet. The change was more than cosmetic. It was fundamental. "Dr. Caldwell?" A young nurse intercepted him near the elevators. "Dr. Martinez wants to see you in the surgical wing before your first procedure." Sebastian nodded, but first made a detour to the maternity ward. The nurses there had gotten used to seeing him every morning for the past 6 weeks. First as a new father learning how to change diapers and interpret different types of crying, and now as their newest colleague. Room 218 was no longer Rowan's. She'd been discharged days after James's birth, but Sebastian still thought of it as the place where his real life had begun. He found Rowan in the doctor's lounge, pumping breast milk between her morning rounds. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with the smile that still made his chest tighten with love. "Ready for your first day back?" she asked, efficiently packing the milk into small storage containers. "Terrified," Sebastian admitted. "It's been 8 years since I've held a scalpel. It'll come back to you like riding a bicycle." She stood and straightened his scrub top, a gesture so domestic and natural that it still amazed him. "Just remember, you're not saving the world today. You're helping one child at a time. How's James this morning?" "Demanding breakfast at 5 a.m. as usual. Mom took him for a walk around the ward to let the night staff say hello." Rowan paused, studying Sebastian's face. "Are you having second thoughts? About any of this?" It was a question she'd asked several times over the past 6 weeks, and Sebastian understood why. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been moments when the magnitude of what he'd given up hit him like a physical blow. Not the money, which he'd never really needed, but the sense of purpose that had come from running a major corporation. The feeling that his decisions affected thousands of people. "No second thoughts," he said firmly. "But I do have something to tell you." Rowan's expression grew cautious. "What?" "My father called yesterday." The tension in her shoulders was immediate. Richard Caldwell had been notably absent from their lives since that devastating phone call 6 weeks ago, but his influence was still felt. Sebastian's trust fund had been frozen. His position at Caldwell Pharmaceuticals had been officially terminated. Most of his former friends had stopped returning calls. What did he want? To make one final offer. Sebastian pulled out his phone and played a voicemail that he'd listened to dozens of times since receiving it. Richard's voice filled the small lounge. "Sebastian, I've had time to think about our situation, and I believe we can find a compromise that works for everyone. I'm prepared to offer Dr. Pierce a position as head of pediatric research at our new Boston facility. Excellent salary, full benefits, her own team of researchers. And for you, a return to the company as chief medical officer, overseeing all our drug development programs. You'd be practicing medicine in a way, just on a larger scale." The message continued. "The position comes with a condition, of course. The child would need to be raised with appropriate discretion, private schools, proper social connections, but without the complications of an official acknowledgement of family ties. Think of it as the best of both worlds. You get to practice medicine, she gets to advance her career, and the child receives all the advantages of Caldwell resources without the public complications." The voicemail ended and Rowan sat down heavily in one of the lounge chairs. "He's offering us everything," she said quietly. "Everything except the right to be a real family. Sebastian, that's millions of dollars. Research opportunities I could never get anywhere else. For you, it's a chance to impact medical development on a global scale. Sebastian knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Rowan, look at me." She met his eyes, and he could see the conflict there. The practical part of her mind was calculating what Richard's offer could mean for James's future, for her career, for their financial security. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that your father is very smart. He's not offering us money to go away anymore. He's offering us success, purpose, the chance to do meaningful work. But he's still asking us to pretend that James isn't your son. He's asking us to raise our child as a family secret." Sebastian nodded. "And what do you think about that?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, and Sebastian could see her working through the decision methodically, the way she approached complex medical cases. "I think," she said finally, "that I didn't fight for the right to raise my son with his father just to hide that relationship from the world." Relief flooded Sebastian's chest. "So we're saying no." "We're saying no." Rowan smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Even though it means James grows up without Caldwell money. Even though it means I'll probably never run my own research program. Even though it means you'll be just another pediatric surgeon instead of a medical industry leader. Just another pediatric surgeon who gets to go home every night to the woman he loves and the son he adores," Sebastian corrected. "Rowan, I spent 8 years in corporate boardrooms thinking I was changing the world. But you know what actually changes the world? This morning I'm going to remove a brain tumor from a 7-year-old girl named Emma. If the surgery goes well, she'll grow up to become whatever she wants to be. That's changing the world one life at a time." Before Rowan could respond, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway holding James, who was making the increasingly urgent sounds that meant feeding time was imminent. "Sorry to interrupt," Elizabeth said, "but someone is demanding his mother's attention." Sebastian stood and took his son from his grandmother-in-law, marveling, as he always did, at how James seemed to calm immediately in his father's arms. At 6 weeks old, James was already showing signs of the strong will he'd inherited from both parents. He knew what he wanted and wasn't shy about demanding it. "Hello, little man," Sebastian murmured, adjusting James's tiny knit cap. "Daddy's about to go save someone else's baby. Think you can behave for Mommy and Grandma today?" James looked up at him with those serious gray eyes, and Sebastian felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had become the defining emotion of his new life. "I called your father back," Sebastian said to Rowan while still looking at James. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that James Oliver Pierce Caldwell will grow up knowing exactly who his father is. I told him that if he ever wants to be part of his grandson's life, he knows where to find us. And I told him that we're building something real here, something that doesn't need his money or approval to survive." "Pierce Caldwell?" Rowan's voice was soft with surprise. "If that's okay with you, I want him to have both our names. I want the world to know he belongs to both of us." Tears filled Rowan's eyes, but she was smiling. "It's more than okay." Sebastian's pager buzzed. His first surgery was in 30 minutes. "I have to go," he said reluctantly, kissing James's forehead and then Rowan's lips. "But I'll see you both tonight." "Sebastian?" Rowan called as he reached the door. "Yeah, I love you. Not the man your father wanted you to be, not the man you used to be. I love the man you are right now, in this moment. Even if that man is about to be late for his first surgery in 8 years? Especially then." Sebastian left the lounge with a smile on his face and purpose in his step. As he walked toward the surgical wing, he passed the executive offices where hospital administrators made decisions about budgets and policies. 6 months ago, he would have looked at those offices with longing, missing the power and influence of high-level decision-making. Today he barely glanced at them. Dr. Martinez was waiting for him outside operating room 3, holding Emma's file. "Ready, doctor?" "Caldwell?" Sebastian thought about Emma, sleeping under anesthesia, trusting him to fix what was broken. He thought about her parents, waiting in agony for news. He thought about James, who would grow up in a world where his father chose healing over wealth, love over power. "Ready," he said. And as Sebastian Caldwell scrubbed in for surgery, he felt something he'd been missing for 8 years without realizing it. He felt like himself. 2 hours later, when he emerged from the operating room to tell Emma's parents that the surgery had been successful, that their daughter would make a full recovery, Sebastian understood that he'd found his way back to the man Rowan had fallen in love with. The man who believed that some things were worth more than money. The man who knew that love, once found, was worth fighting for no matter the cost. The man who was finally, completely, exactly where he belonged. 5 years later, The sound of children's laughter echoed through the backyard of the modest colonial house in Stamford, Connecticut. Sebastian stood at the kitchen window, watching 5-year-old James chase butterflies through Rowan's carefully tended herb garden, his dark hair catching the late afternoon sunlight of a perfect October day. "Daddy, look!" James called out, pointing to a monarch butterfly that had landed on the lavender plants. "It's orange like Halloween." "I see it, buddy," Sebastian called back, unable to suppress his smile. James had inherited Rowan's curiosity about the natural world and Sebastian's determination to understand how everything worked. Last week, he'd spent an entire afternoon dissecting a flower to see what was inside, explaining his findings to anyone who would listen. "Dr. Caldwell?" A voice behind him made Sebastian turn. Maria Santos, the mother of one of his recent patients, stood in the doorway holding a casserole dish. "I hope we're not too early." "Not at all. Come in." Sebastian welcomed her and her family into the kitchen, which was already filled with the warm scents of Rowan's famous chili and fresh cornbread. "How's Carlos feeling?" "Like a completely different child," Maria replied, her eyes bright with tears of gratitude. 3 months ago, we thought we might lose him. Now he's outside playing soccer with your son." Through the window, Sebastian could see Carlos, now fully recovered from the complex heart surgery Sebastian had performed, running around the yard with James and several other children. It was a sight that never got old. Former patients healthy and thriving, living the lives that surgery had made possible. The annual patient reunion had started 2 years ago, when one of Sebastian's patients had asked if she could visit him at home to show him how well she was doing. Word had spread, and now every October, their backyard filled with families whose lives had been touched by Sebastian's surgical skills and Rowan's compassionate care. "Sebastian?" Rowan appeared from the living room, carrying 2-year-old Elena on her hip. Their daughter had Rowan's green eyes and golden hair, but Sebastian's stubborn streak was already evident in her refusal to nap when the house was full of interesting people. "The Patel family just arrived," Rowan continued, "and little Anya is asking if she can see the scar from her surgery. She wants to show it off to the other kids." Sebastian grinned. "Tell her I'll be right there." As Rowan headed back to their guests, Sebastian caught her hand, pulling her close for a quick kiss despite Elena's protests about being squished between her parents. "Happy?" he asked, a question that had become their daily ritual. "Completely," Rowan replied, the same answer she'd given every day for the past 5 years. The life they'd built together was nothing like the one Sebastian had been raised to expect, but it was everything he'd never known he wanted. Their house was modest by Caldwell standards, a 4-bedroom colonial with a mortgage and neighbors who borrowed sugar and invited them to barbecues. Sebastian drove a reliable SUV instead of a Bentley, and their idea of luxury was takeout pizza on nights when they were both too tired to cook. But it was real in a way Sebastian's old life had never been. "Daddy, Daddy," James burst through the back door, his face flushed with excitement. "Anya said you took out her whole heart and put it back better. Can you take out my heart too? Your heart is perfect just the way it is," Sebastian assured him, kneeling to James's level. "Anya needed surgery because her heart wasn't working properly. Yours works perfectly." "How do you know?" "Because I listen to it every night when I tuck you in," Sebastian said, pressing his ear dramatically to James's chest. "Yep, still perfect." James giggled, the sound joining the chorus of happy voices filling their home. As the afternoon progressed, Sebastian found himself moving through rooms full of families whose lives intersected with his in the most meaningful way possible. There was 8-year-old David, whose brain tumor removal had been Sebastian's first surgery back at St. Mary's, now showing off his math homework. There was baby Isabella, born with a congenital heart defect that Sebastian had repaired when she was just 6 months old, now taking her first wobbly steps across their living room floor. Each child represented a choice Sebastian had made to pursue meaning over money, purpose over prestige. "Dr. Caldwell?" Elizabeth Pierce appeared at his elbow, now a permanent fixture in their lives and James and Elena's devoted grandmother. "There's someone here to see you." Sebastian looked toward the front door and felt his breath catch. Richard Caldwell stood on their front porch, looking distinctly out of place in his expensive suit among the casual crowd of young families. He was holding a wrapped gift and wearing an expression Sebastian had never seen before: uncertainty. "Dad." Sebastian stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him to give them privacy. "I didn't expect to see you. I know I should have called." Richard's voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "But I wanted to give this to James. For his birthday." James's 5th birthday had been last month, celebrated with a backyard party that featured a bouncy house, face painting, and more sugar than any child should consume in a single day. Sebastian and Rowan had deliberately kept it small, intimate, focused on James's friends from preschool and neighbors from their street. It's not his birthday anymore, Dad. I know. I missed it. I've missed a lot of things. Richard held out the gift, a carefully wrapped box that was probably worth more than Sebastian's monthly salary. I've been thinking about what you said, about family, about what really matters. Sebastian studied his father's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but what he saw instead was something he'd never expected to see in Richard Caldwell's eyes. Regret. The company's not doing well without you, Richard continued. Oh, we're still profitable, still growing, but there's no soul to it anymore. No vision beyond the next quarterly report. Dad, I'm not here to offer you anything, Sebastian. I'm not here to try to convince you to come back. I'm here because... Richard paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. I'm here because I have a grandson I've never met, and I'm starting to think that might be the biggest mistake I've ever made. Through the window, Sebastian could see James playing with Elena, showing her how to clap along to music that one of the other families had brought. His son was confident, joyful, surrounded by love and laughter. He doesn't need Caldwell money, Dad. He's already rich. I can see that. Richard's voice was quiet. Sebastian, I owe you an apology, and I owe Dr. Pierce an apology. What I did 5 years ago, the way I tried to manipulate the situation, it was wrong. Sebastian leaned against the porch railing, studying his father. What changed your mind? Honestly, I've been watching you, from a distance. I know about your work at the hospital, about the surgeries you've performed, about the families you've helped. Richard paused. I read an article about you in the medical journal last month, about your work with pediatric cardiac procedures. The journalist called you a surgeon who operates with both technical precision and uncommon compassion. You've been keeping track of my career. I've been keeping track of my son. Richard's voice cracked slightly. And I've been realizing that in trying to force you to be the man I thought you should be, I nearly prevented you from becoming the man you were meant to be. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected vulnerability from a man who had never shown weakness. The gift, Sebastian said finally. What is it? A medical school fund. For James. Not Caldwell money. Money I've earned separately, invested carefully. Enough to pay for his education if he chooses to follow in his father's footsteps. Dad, he's 5 years old. I know. But I also know that children who grow up understanding the value of education, of helping others, of using their talents for something greater than themselves, those children change the world. Through the window, James's laughter rang out as he successfully taught Elena to spin in circles. Both children collapsed on the floor in a fit of giggles, and Sebastian felt his heart constrict with love. You can give it to him yourself, Sebastian said quietly. If you want. Richard's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Are you sure? I'm sure that James deserves to know his grandfather. I'm sure that families are complicated, messy, sometimes broken, but worth fighting for. Sebastian paused. And I'm sure that Rowan will want to meet the man who raised the father of her children. Her children. Plural. Sebastian smiled. Elena is 2 years old. She has your eyes and Rowan's stubborn streak. She also has an alarming ability to escape from any child-proof lock we install. I have a granddaughter. You have 2 grandchildren, Dad. If you want them. Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. I would like that very much. Sebastian opened the front door, and the sounds of their happy, chaotic life spilled out onto the porch. Richard followed him inside, where he was immediately confronted with everything his world of formal dinners and business meetings had never included. Children running through the hallway, parents comparing notes about sleepless nights and preschool dramas, teenagers helping serve food while texting friends. James, Sebastian called to his son, who was showing another child his collection of toy stethoscopes. Come here, buddy. There's someone I want you to meet. James trotted over, curious and unafraid in the way of children who have always been secure in their parents' love. James, this is your grandfather. My father. James looked up at Richard with those serious gray eyes that were so much like Sebastian's own, and Richard felt his careful composure crumble completely. Hello, James, Richard managed. Are you really my grandpa? James asked with the directness of a 5-year-old. Yes, I am. Do you know how to listen to hearts? What? James grabbed one of his toy stethoscopes and held it out. Daddy taught me. You put this part on someone's chest and listen. Want to try? Richard knelt down to James's level, accepting the toy stethoscope with hands that shook slightly. Show me how. For the next 10 minutes, Sebastian watched his father learn to listen to toy heartbeats under the patient instruction of his 5-year-old grandson. It was a sight he never could have imagined. Richard Caldwell, pharmaceutical empire builder and manipulator of lives, sitting cross-legged on a living room floor while a small boy explained the proper technique for pretend cardiac examination. Richard? Rowan appeared beside Sebastian. Elena balanced on her hip. I'm glad you came. Richard stood, still holding the toy stethoscope, and faced the woman whose life he'd tried to destroy 5 years ago. Dr. Pierce, I owe you an enormous apology. Yes, you do, Rowan agreed calmly. But apologies are only meaningful if they come with changed behavior. I understand that, and I hope I'll have the chance to prove that I've learned from my mistakes. Elena chose that moment to reach toward Richard, fascinated by his silver hair and expensive watch. Without thinking, Richard shifted to make it easier for the toddler to examine his watch chain, and Sebastian saw his father's expression soften in a way he'd never witnessed before. This is Elena, Rowan said, allowing Richard to hold his granddaughter for the first time. Hello, Elena, Richard whispered, and Sebastian could hear years of regret and hope tangled together in his father's voice. Elena babbled something incomprehensible but enthusiastic, and Richard actually smiled. Not the calculated smile Sebastian remembered from business meetings, but something genuine and warm. She likes you, James observed. She doesn't like everybody. She cried when Mr. Peterson from next door tried to hold her. Did she? Richard asked, clearly charmed. Yeah, but she likes you. That means you're okay. As the afternoon wound down and families began to leave, Richard found himself reluctant to go. He'd spent hours listening to James's explanations about butterflies and playground politics, had helped Elena stack blocks and knock them down, and had even been recruited to help Rowan serve dessert. This is what happiness looks like, he said to Sebastian as they stood on the porch again, watching the last guests drive away. This is what love looks like, Sebastian corrected. Messy, complicated, imperfect love. I spent so many years trying to control outcomes, trying to engineer perfect solutions to complex problems. Richard paused. I never understood that the best things in life can't be controlled. They can only be embraced. Dad, if you want to be part of this, really part of it, you need to understand that we're not going to change our lives to accommodate yours. We're not moving back to Manhattan or joining country clubs or attending charity galas. This is who we are now. I wouldn't want you to change, Richard said firmly. Sebastian, you've built something here that I spent my entire life thinking was impossible. You've built a life that matters, a family that's genuinely happy, a career that changes lives every day. It's not perfect, we struggle with money sometimes. The house needs repairs we can't afford. Rowan and I both work long hours and we're always exhausted. But you're happy. Sebastian looked through the window at his family, Rowan cleaning up the kitchen while singing off-key, James carefully putting his toys away in the designated bins, Elena toddling around the living room with a toy phone pressed to her ear, babbling importantly to no one in particular. Yeah, Dad, we're happy. Richard nodded slowly. Then you've accomplished something I never could. As Richard's car pulled away from their driveway, Sebastian felt a sense of completion he hadn't expected. The war was over, not because anyone had won or lost, but because love had proved stronger than fear, forgiveness more powerful than resentment. How did it go? Rowan asked, appearing beside him with Elena in her arms. Better than I expected. He wants to be part of their lives. And how do you feel about that? Sebastian considered the question seriously. 5 years ago, the thought of Richard Caldwell having access to his children would have terrified him. But the man who had left their house tonight wasn't the same man who had threatened Rowan in a hospital room 5 years ago. I feel like everyone deserves a chance to be better than they used to be, Sebastian said finally. Even my father. Even you? Rowan asked with a smile. Especially me. As they walked back into their house, Sebastian caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The reflection showed a man of 43 with laugh lines around his eyes and hands that were permanently stained, with the kind of honest work that saved lives. His hair was grayer than it had been 5 years ago, and he'd never be as wealthy or powerful as he'd once been, but he was exactly who he was supposed to be. Daddy? James appeared at his elbow, holding a book about dinosaurs. Will you read to me? Of course. And Elena too? And Elena too. And Mommy? If Mommy wants to. I always want to, Rowan said, kissing the top of James's head. As they settled into the living room for their nightly reading ritual, Sebastian understood that this was what victory looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. 5 years ago, he'd thought he was choosing between two different lives. Now he understood that he'd been choosing between fear and courage, control and trust, the safety of emotional distance and the risk of loving completely. He'd chosen love, and every day since, that choice had been validated by moments exactly like this one. His son curled against his side, his daughter playing quietly on the floor, his wife's hand in his, their modest home filled with the kind of contentment that couldn't be bought or inherited or stolen. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, the first of the season. But inside, their family was warm, safe, and exactly where they belonged. Sometimes, Sebastian thought, as he opened James's dinosaur book, love really was enough. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting